Welcome. Good to see you. Um, Another joy to be here with y'all and to share these teachings and cultivate the awareness that these teachings are designed to bring us into. As you know, if you've come here on Sunday mornings, we aim at eliciting an experience of discovering the divine within the heart, this awakened state of mind. So all of the teachings that we bring out on a Sunday morning from whatever culture, from whatever time, they're designed to trigger this experience, to awaken that presence within the heart. So this morning we're going to be looking eastward into India for the most part. We're going to start with poems from Lal Ded, that's D-E-D. And then we're going to look into some of the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Bhagavad Gita. I think you guys will enjoy that very much. I know I will. It really doesn't matter other than that. You're me after all. So why don't we start by just settling down, quieting down, and recognizing the opportunity that lays before us, this opportunity of self-discovery, of self-realization, of spiritual awakening, and set our intentions there. And so we set our collective intention this morning to bring in this divine presence closer and closer to our heart so that we can begin to recognize that at our core, our deepest nature, we are this very self, shared with all life and with the source of life. And here is our peace, here is our happiness, here is the fulfillment of every desire, here is unshakable security. And so we turn to the self, capital S, and away from looking at the world, thinking that in the world we can find what only the self can bestow. And so it is. So permit me a little stream of consciousness here. There is a teaching in the Hindu faith that centers around Krishna, and they describe God in a very full sense. So there are three aspects to God according to these teachings. You have what is called the Paramatma, which is this indwelling presence, the spark of divinity within the heart of all beings. And so at the very core of all life is a divine spark, divine reality. Then you have what's referred to as Brahman, and Brahman is the infinite void, impersonal, no qualities, the very ground or silence of all universal life. It's the great sea, and all the rushing rivers come into it and become quiet and still, right? And then you have what's called Bhagavan. And Bhagavan exists beyond the Brahman, beyond the void. And it's the supreme person, it's the presence of divinity itself, and all of life is a reflection of this supreme person. So all persons acquire their personhood or personality, their divine personality, from the supreme person or Bhagavan. And so, depending on your spirituality, you will oftentimes focus on one of those three aspects. You know, for many of us starting out, we focus on our own inner divinity, our own spark, and we want to cultivate this presence within our own heart, right? The kingdom of God is within, and we go to work in finding it within ourselves. Eventually, we come to find God, and all of that other stuff comes in to integrate nicely. Others want to dissolve into the void or the impersonal. And so you find spiritual paths that are just trying to get out of the world and into the void. And others are more devotional centered, where they are looking to acquire this direct and immediate and personal relationship with the Supreme Person. And so depending on your bent, your character, your disposition at this time, you often will gravitate towards one of those approaches. So none of them are right or wrong. They're just where you're at this time is my take on it all. But I think we're going to cover some ground today that will touch in on each of those levels, and that's why I bring them up. Why don't we prime the pump a little bit more with poetry from Lal Ded. She comes from Kashmir. In about the 1200s she lived, so medieval time. She was a devotee of Shiva, but went beyond the name and form of Shiva into a more non-dual, awakened state. And her poetry comes from this place, but it also comes oftentimes from her struggle. So a lot of her poetry will reflect the development that eventually bears fruit in that settled, equanimous state. But there is the turbulence along the way in her poetry. But in the one that we're about to share, not so much. So this one, she says, wrapped up in yourself, you hid from me. All day I looked for you, and when I found you hiding inside me, I ran wild, playing now me, now you. So she's referring to the divine, and when she's saying, I looked for you and I found you inside me, right? So it's a turning away from the world, a looking within the very heart of our own consciousness. This is something that we're going to really keep on bringing out this morning, that our natural inclination is to seek our desires' fulfillment out in the world. That's kind of how we come in on a default setting. We think that through objects, through people, through experiences out in the world, that we will find the luxury, the well-being, the joy, the pleasure. And so the world looks like a very attractive place for the mind that is unaware of its true nature. And we're going to get more into that as we move along. But when you begin your spiritual journey, it will oftentimes be where you have this experience that the world isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Death of a loved one, divorce, the pain of raising a child and it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, failure at a job, personal health issues. These things will oftentimes hit as shocks. And it's in those moments of shock that we can begin to reevaluate the nature of the world and who am I, what's it all about, and we begin to look for a deeper, more meaningful experience, and oftentimes that's the shock that will often bring us back into ourself and begin to cultivate this insight, this spiritual journey. And so what Lal Ded is saying is when she did find this presence, it begins to show up in these stages of development where it's her and then it's God. And so there's this back and forth, where there's still this residue of the ego self, but then you could start to see that in all of these moments, God is starting to shine through more and more. Okay? She says this, you won't find the truth by crossing your legs and holding your breath. Daydreams won't take you through the gateway of release. You can stir as much salt as you like in water. It won't become the sea. So this is where we oftentimes will take pseudo-spiritual paths. We will take religious lifestyles upon ourselves, but in many ways, it's really the ego is still driving, right? The false personality is still trying to get something. Now that it doesn't get it within the world, oftentimes it's trying to get it through some kind of spiritual path. And what she says is, you can go through these motions. You can, go to yoga class, cross your legs, do pranayama, hold your breath. But daydreams won't take you through the gateway of release. In other words, all conceptual thinking, all sort of, wishful thinking and hoping and mythology and folklore and believing in these books and traditions, these are all conjurings of the mind. They can be helpful for a little while, but eventually you have to go beyond imagination, beyond concepts. And this is where you come to a place of true discovery. That's why she says it doesn't matter if you put salt in water, that pseudo solution to try to fix your problems in life, it's not the oceanic presence. You have to go to the real deal. The real deal exists. The real deal is waiting for us to be ready to accept it. But we will often try these pseudo solutions. So first we go out into the world trying to find it there. And as we become older and hopefully wiser, we realize it's not there. And then we oftentimes will get sidetracked with the narcissistic spirituality. We begin to try to find it in, playing dress up or going into these different traditions that really don't deliver. They just add more baggage to the mind. Okay? A couple more here. She's talking about the intimacy with God. He laughs when you laugh, sneezes in your sleep, yawns for you, coughs for you. He bathes every day in the river of your thoughts. He's naked all year round and walks where you walk. Just go up and introduce yourself. So closer to you than your own heartbeat, this presence is here. It's your very awareness. And so we are really in the matter of trying to get to a place where we just recognize the obvious, what's always already the case. Right? God is our own awareness. God is really the one that says, I, and we mistake it for 10,000 things. Last one. Gourmet meals and elegant clothes can't buy you peace of mind. Only they climb higher who have left delusion behind. They know death is fire behind a smiling mask. And desire is a tough lender who talks sweet. So this is the sobering up that takes place when we begin to see that the world really is a distraction device. It's really the honeypot to keep us from discovering the true treasure of life, the true essence or core of divinity within the heart. And we all know the story when Buddha, before he was Buddha, was born as a prince in northern India. And when he was born, they still do this in India to this day. They draw an astrological chart to see what kind of destiny this child is born under, what kind of stars are, sort of operating within his life. And they said when the court astrologers told Buddha's father that he's either going to be a world-turning king, a Chakravartin, or he's going to be a renunciate. The king said, well, of course my boy's going to have to take over the company. So I'm going to give him the life of luxury so that he never desires to renounce the world. He'll fall in love with the world. And so we know the story. The king made all attempts to keep the palace pristine, changed the flowers every day. The Buddha never saw a wilting flower. The Buddha never saw anything that showed signs of decay, dancing girls, beautiful buffets, parties, sporting. Everything was just perfect. Couldn't ask for a better life. But the Buddha sensed that there was something beyond the palace walls that he wanted to see and discover. And so he asked his chariot driver to take him out one day, and he saw a sick man as they went on their way. And he never saw somebody sick before, and he asked his chariot driver, Chana, what is that? And the chariot driver said, that's a sick man, my lord. And he says, will I too become sick? He says, oh yes, everyone who's born becomes sick. And take me home, I don't want to go out anymore. So this repeats, right? As the story goes on, he sees an old man. Will I become old? Oh yes, my lord. Everyone that's born ages. Well, I don't want to be old. I'm so depressed, take me home. And then finally he sees a corpse on the road covered in flies and maggots. And he says, I too will die? Oh yes. And so this was the shock that the Buddha needed. And he realized, what's all this luxury? What's all this pleasure if it's all impermanent, if it's all temporary, if it all ends in aging, disease, and death? Like, is it real? If it were real, it could be depended on. It would be sustainable. It's not sustainable. It's all winding down, and it will eventually all pass away. Very sobering. And we talked about this in our class on Monday night at Course in Miracles, where Jesus talks in that section of the Course of the one real alternative. And the one real alternative shows up, as it did for the Buddha, when you realize that all the roads in the world lead to illusion. They're all choices amongst illusions. There's no real happiness here. There's no real safety here. There's no real wealth here. And when you begin to recognize this, it's a shock. And Jesus says in that teaching, when people usually come to realize this, this existential breakdown occurs. Right? This is where we get existentialism, yes? Existentialism happened after World War II. We were on this trek of science is going to solve all of our problems. We're going to end disease. We're going to develop utopian society. We're going to figure it all out. There's that story of an Oxford physicist who asked his professor, should he major in physics? And the professor said, you probably don't want to because we're about to figure everything out in a couple of years. So you probably want to go discover something else if you want to, push the envelope. Physics is pretty much handled. But all of that came crashing down. We had the quantum revolution, which opened up a whole new mystery to physics. But more importantly, our utopian society hit the First World War, and then it hit the Second World War. And it was atrocities on a magnitude and scale that we've never seen before. And so what existentialism is, it's a philosophy that's born out of the scientific mindset where you're rational, you figured it all out, you know basically how life works, and then it's shit. And you're dealing with the blowback of clear seeing. You actually are not foolish, you're not wishful thinking, you're not in some myth-making religious perspective. You're not, obtuse and ignoring what's there. You're actually seeing it and realizing life sucks at its core. Like there's no happiness here. There's no sustaining peace here, right? Don't worry, there's a silver lining. But existentialism was this recognition that there's nausea, right? There's ennui, there's this sense of disquietude that can't be settled. And Jesus says in that passage on the real alternative, you have to get there. You can't wake up until you enter that existential breakdown. You have to feel that nausea at your core. And so when this occurs, he says, a lot of people suicide themselves. They can't live anymore. They give up hope. But for those who are willing and courageous to go beyond what the world was offering, there you find it. Like Bob Dylan sang, there's a highway of diamonds with nobody on it. And this is where you find this highway of diamonds, this leading inward. And so the turnabout in the deepest seat of the heart is the first necessary step in the awakening of consciousness. Consciousness has to divorce itself from the pursuit of trying to find peace and safety and fulfillment in the world or in the body. It just won't happen. Try as you'd like. All choices amongst illusions. So the real alternative is to find this path that leads to the divine. And so we're going to look here in one of Sri Aurobindo's books, Integral Yoga, where he says this, under the heading, The One Thing Needful. It is the lesson of life that always in this world everything fails a man. Only the divine does not fail him if he turns entirely to the divine. It is not because there is something bad in you that blows fall on you. Blows fall on all human beings because they are full of desire for things that cannot last, and they lose them, or even if they get them, it brings disappointment and cannot satisfy. To turn to the divine is the only truth in life. To find the divine is indeed the first reason for seeking the spiritual truth and the spiritual life. It is the one thing indispensable, and all the rest is nothing without it. The divine once found, to manifest him, that is, first of all, to transform one's own limited consciousness into the divine consciousness, to live in the infinite peace, light, love, strength, bliss, to become that in one's essential nature, and as a consequence, to be its vessel, channel, instrument in one's active nature. So this is what demarcates the authentic spiritual journey. You're willing, to use an unpopular term here, you're willing to be colonized by the divine consciousness. That means you're going to open your borders. You're going to surrender your forces of resistance. You're going to open all the doors and windows of your mind. You're going to allow these subtle forces of the presence or Holy Spirit to come in and open you up. You're going to learn how to hide nothing from God's all-seeing eye, right? And you'll realize that this presence actually is you. This is what Lal Ded was saying, me and you in this infinite play. It becomes this dance where God is your partner and yourself simultaneously. A little bit more from Aurobindo. Now he's talking about motives for seeking the divine. So when we first get on the path, this was my case anyway. I'm telling on myself here. When I was 21, I was an idiot. So let's start there. And I don't mean that lightly. I really was an idiot. I mean, really. Stupid. But, had a good heart, but totally gullible and totally narcissistic. Idiot. But I love him now. I've learned a lot from him. But at that time, I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to be famous. I wanted to be an actor. And so I moved to New York City and thought I was going to be an actor. And then I realized along the way, through destiny or divine providence or whatever you want to call it, that dream got interrupted, and I started to have a spiritual awakening when I was living in New York City. And so now, because of the way that this spiritual awakening came to me, I thought I was really special. And now I'm going to be able to, be a star, but for God. So my motivation was to be the best and most popular and famous teacher. And that was my 21-year-old motivation for getting into this work. Now, I'm not really being that honest, because underneath all of that was the true yearning of my heart, and I wanted to go home. That was the real feeling behind what was really happening to me. I knew I wasn't home. I knew there was something that this world wasn't telling me about myself. I wanted that. I wanted to remember that. I wanted my home. And in the meantime, I'll be really famous and help people. And be rich and, all that. And so that was my motivation. And as a result of God's love for me, I received none of it. In fact, I received the opposite of it. I was constantly humbled, constantly thwarted, constantly made to feel like I was a fool. And it broke me down. It ended that clenching, that lust, that desire to be somebody, to be famous. And that was grace. And the motivation then, over many, many, many years, eventually became, I only want you. This is what I'm living for. I'm living to serve you. And it doesn't matter if I do it and nobody knows it, or you use me in a way that I won't even, just have your way, right? That was kind of where I got to. And so the motivation will change over time, but we oftentimes will find that we're motivated in the beginning, like I was, because of what's in it for me. And that over time will break down, and you'll begin to see, and oftentimes there's like an existential crisis there, because God doesn't give you exactly what you wanted. In fact, it often looks like it's being taken away. What you originally were motivated by isn't coming. In fact, it's going. And then you come to a place of true authenticity, true meaningful spiritual life. And so Aurobindo says a little bit about this. Obviously, to seek the divine only for what one can get out of him is not the proper attitude. But if it were absolutely forbidden to seek him for these things, most people in the world would not turn towards him at all. I suppose, therefore, it is allowed so that they may make a beginning. If they have faith, they may get what they ask for and think it a good thing to go on. And then one day they may suddenly stumble upon the idea that this is, after all, not quite the one thing to do, and that there are better ways and a better spirit in which one can approach the divine. So when I look at the mega churches that you see around the country, and they're praying for the new car, and they're praying for, you get the pastors there praying for the private jet. These are all approaches, and I'm not going to say about the con game that can be going on at times, but these are all approaches to the divine. And if the intention is sincere, as Sri Aurobindo was saying, eventually trying to get something like the perfect partner or the car, the money, the financial security, that eventually has you trusting more because God begins to come through for you. That can happen as well. A little bit more. If they do not get what they want and still come to the divine and trust in him, well, that shows they are getting ready. Let us look at it as a sort of infant's school for the unready. But of course, that is not the spiritual life. It is only a sort of elementary approach. So we're like little children. We're like little infants. We want something. We want to get something. And eventually this becomes, a maturing where we realize there's nothing to get because the divine exists within us already. But we all approach through this process of learning and development. Okay? So for the spiritual life, to give and not to demand is the rule. So a little bit more about the world as the catalyst for awakening. We were driving over here this morning, and we saw a dove sitting in the middle of Canner Highway. And if you know anything about doves, they usually show you that they're not too bright. Lisa has taught me a lot about doves. I mean, of course, she's loving and sweet and kind when she says it. But they'll build their nests on the grass. They'll build, they'll just do things that are really not smart. So when we were driving, the dove is on Canner Highway, and because cars started to come, it's flying. And Lisa said it's probably a baby, and it's learning how to take off. And the fear of the cars can be a great motivator to learn how to use your skills of flight. And so gets back to this idea of shocks, that if it weren't for the crises in our life, we oftentimes would never learn how to fly. We would never really learn how to use our wings. And so in these deeper teachings that we find from ancient India, two come to mind immediately. One we're going to be looking at in a moment, the Bhagavad Gita. It starts out, the story of the Gita starts out with the first chapter, usually entitled, The Despondency of Arjuna. Arjuna is having an existential crisis. The other teaching that comes to mind is Yoga Vasishta. And Yoga Vasishta tells the story of young Rama. And if you know anything about Rama, he was an incarnation of Vishnu. And Rama, as a young man in his palace, starts out with the despondency of Rama, because he sees the world in all of its grandeur and realizes it's nothing. And it's this shock that begins to open Rama up. In fact, instead of turning to the Gita, let's turn there for a moment. Because Rama's in the palace, and he won't come into the throne room where all of these great rishis or sages are sitting with his father, the king. And they're saying, where's Rama? Where's the crown prince? Well, he doesn't want to come. He's in his room. He just got back from pilgrimage, and he's really in a tough space. He's feeling really down. And so they go and get Rama, and Rama goes through a very lengthy and beautifully stated explanation of how he just doesn't see any value in the world anymore. Wealth, egotism, youth, young adulthood, senility, death, all of these are the marks of the world. And as he's going through this total despondency, the sages are listening to him, and they're listening with a clear understanding that what he's really feeling is leading him to enlightenment, right? So he says at one point to the sages, tell me, what is that condition or state in which one does not experience any grief? How can one who is involved in the world and its activities, as I am, reach the supreme state of peace and bliss? What's that attitude that enables one to be influenced by, not to be influenced by various kinds of activities and experiences? Please tell me, how do you people, you rishis, you sages, who are enlightened, live in this world? How can the mind be freed from lust and made to view the world both as one's own self and also as no more valuable than a blade of grass? Obviously, this world is full of pain and death. How does it become a source of joy without befuddling one's heart? Right? So this is the big question here, yes? How should one live here so as not to fall victim to the twin currents of lust and anger? Obviously, there is a secret that enables one to remain unaffected by the grief and suffering in this world, even as mercury is not affected when it's thrown into the fire. What is that secret? What is the secret that counteracts the habit of the mind that is spread out as the form of this universe? So they go on, the sages will eventually start to answer, and this is when Vashishta, the great sage, begins to teach Rama his yoga. And the first thing that Vashishta teaches Rama to answer his question, what's the secret, is effort. You have to want this. And the word used comes from the Sanskrit. The word for effort is tapas. It means to heat things up. In other words, you're directing your will with focus, with intention. You have to want it. If you're lackadaisical, if you're half in and half out, if you're easily distracted away, if other things seem to take priority at other times than the divine, then you're just not ready yet. So effort needs to become increasingly more one-pointed and focused, so that effort begins to open you up to truly knowing yourself and truly awakening into God. And so this is where we can pick up the story of the Gita. So Arjuna is talking to Krishna. This is the story. So Arjuna's Krishna's cousin. He's a mighty warrior. They're on the battlefield. I think many of you know this story. And Arjuna's having his crisis because on the other side of the battlefield are all of his family, his kith and his kin. and he has to destroy them because they've been operating with very deceitful and evil plans for many years. The kingdom rightfully belongs to Arjuna and his brothers, and Krishna is a great king in ancient India, and so Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot. And at the beginning of the story, Arjuna says to Krishna, drive my chariot between these two armies so that I can really see what's going on and who's here. He sinks down in his chariot at one point because he's like, I don't want to kill my uncles and grandfathers and my teachers and everybody who I loved growing up as a boy. Like, this is insane. And so he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to participate. It really is a difficult time for Arjuna. So at that moment when he finally gives up and he prays to Krishna, please guide me, then the Gita, the song, begins. And this is the song of Bhagavan. This is the song of the Supreme Person. And so Arjuna gets opened up to the secret. And what's the secret? Well, it's yoga. It's intimacy with the divine, cultivating this intimacy. And what we're about to read comes in the very beginning of the yoga teachings of the Gita, and it's tapas. It's effort, because the mind is restless. The mind is fickle. The mind is stubborn. The mind is often unconscious and pulled by habit energy. And if you don't take the reins of your mind, you will oftentimes be on a ride and you don't know where it's going. It will just keep producing chaos in your life. So Arjuna says this to Krishna. He says, restless indeed is the mind. It's vehement, strong, and difficult to bend. I deem it as hard to control as the wind. And then the Lord said, without doubt, the mind is restless and very difficult to restrain, but it may be controlled by constant practice, right? Sadhana, effort, willingness, and non-attachment. You become increasingly more equanimous, dispassionate with what's coming up in the mind. You're no longer pissed when things are going bad, and you're no longer elated when things seem to be going good. You find the middle way. You become more and more relaxed and detached, clearly seeing. And this is Sri Aurobindo's comment. The human mind is a public place, open on all sides. And in this public place, things come and go, cross from all directions, and some settle there, and these are not always the best. And there, to obtain control over that multitude is the most difficult of all controls. Try to control the thought coming into your mind, and you'll see. Simply, you will see to what a degree you have to be watchful, like a sentinel, right? Watching the mind, putting all of your effort to learning how to watch the mind. This is what we do in Zen class. We just started on Tuesday. We sit, and when you sit, you have nowhere to go, and you're going to look. You have to look. And what you'll begin to find, like Sri Aurobindo is saying, is your mind's a very busy place. A lot of chattering, a lot of talk, a lot of different habits and impulses. And as you begin to sit more, you begin to develop a more subtle and subtle insight. And you begin to actually suss out each impulse comes from one of two trajectories. The impulse is either going to direct you towards enlightenment, or the impulse is going to direct you away from enlightenment. Right? In the yoga science, it's referred to as klishta, which is these are impulses that will torment you over time if you give in to them. and aklishta. These are impulses that will actually relieve you of suffering if you surrender to them. Your mind is only operating in this binary way. You're either giving rise to impulses that hurt you or impulses that set you free. When we start out in this self-inquiry and learning to watch our mind, we will realize that the public square of our mind is mostly dominated by miscreants and stupid things and distractions and impulses that lead into the world. And we have to be okay with that. That's why we cultivate detachment. Aurobindo continues. He says, you must police your mind at every minute. It's a public place where all roads meet, so that all passers-by are rushing in, and you have to learn how to stop that so that the mind can settle and get quiet. It's a big job, he says. Then don't forget that even if you make sincere efforts, it's not in a day, not in a month, not in a year that you will reach the end of these difficulties. When one begins, one must begin with an unshakable patience. One must say, even if it takes 50 years, even if it takes 100 years, even if it takes several lives, what I want to accomplish, I shall accomplish. Once you have decided upon this, once you are quite conscious that things are like that, and that the goal is worth the trouble of a constant and sustained effort, you may begin. Otherwise, after a time, you'll fall flat. You'll get discouraged. You'll tell yourself, oh, it's very difficult. I do it and then it's undone. I do it again and once again undone. And then I do it again and it's perpetually undone. Then what? When will I get there? One must have plenty of patience. The work may be undone 100 times. And what he means by undone is, I get it. It's so clear now. It's working. And then all of a sudden, shitstorm. And you don't get it. And it doesn't make sense. And you're completely confused. And then you cultivate more. You keep moving in. He says you'll do that 100 times, maybe 1,000 times. But on the 1,001 time, it may be, you will finally have it undone. So it's inevitable, but you have to put in the effort. You have to be willing to tame your mind. It's where you live. All that you have is your state of mind. Right? And when we are looking for anything in the world to satisfy and fulfill us, we are in an impoverished mind. When we cultivate and deepen the silence and the connection to the divine presence, we are preparing for a wealthy mind. And so Arjuna goes on with the story. He says to Krishna, well, this is Krishna. By one who is not self-controlled, this yoga, this path of union is difficult to attain. But by the self-controlled, it is attainable by properly directed efforts. Krishna says, such is my view. And then this is Aurobindo again. I find this so illuminating. Listen to this. One finds in oneself lots of small hidden folds, little things one had not seen at the beginning. One undertakes a sort of inner chase, goes hunting into all small dark corners, and tells oneself, what? I was like that? This was there in me? I am harboring this pettiness? Sometimes so sordid, so nasty. And once it's been discovered, how wonderful. One puts the light upon it, and it disappears. And you no longer have those reactions which made you so sad before, when you used to say, oh, I'll never get there. So this is the work, looking at yourself, really looking. And you'll find the vermin. You'll find the beauty. You'll find the shame. You'll find what you thought was out in the world in your mind. And then bringing the light to it is the secret. It opens us up to what's beyond the ego. So he says here, for instance, you take a very simple resolution. I shall never tell a lie again. And suddenly, without your knowing why or how, the lie springs up all by itself, and you notice it after you have uttered it. But this is not correct. What I have just said, it was something else I meant to say. So you search. How did it happen? How did I think like that and speak like that? Who spoke in me? Did you ever notice this when you're really trying to clean up your life? You get taken down again by the very nature of what you were trying to purify? This is the habit energy. These are your past actions coming up. You have to look at them. They're there to be seen and then dealt with in a different way. You may give yourself quite a satisfactory explanation, right? So here come the defenses. It came from outside, or it was a moment of unconsciousness, and not think any longer about it. And the next time it begins again. Instead of that, you search, what can be the motive of one who tells lies? Like, why do I tell lies? And you push, really looking. And all of a sudden you discover in a little corner something which wants to justify itself, thrust itself forward, or assert its own way of seeing. Shows itself a little different from what it is, so that people may have a good opinion of you and think you someone very remarkable. It was that which spoke in you, not your active consciousness, but what was there and push the consciousness from behind. So this is what begins to show up if you haven't noticed. When you do this deeper work, not only do you see the world for what it is and it loses its luster, but you also will oftentimes feel like things are getting worse. Like I'm doing my work here. I'm really trying to open up to God, but I'm getting confronted with so much struggle and so much difficulty and bigger doubts and more confusion. And just know that this is the necessary dump that has to take place from the unconscious mind so that you can clear. I'm more lonely. I'm more despondent because you're not going out there for the distractions. When will this end? It will, but you have to keep pushing in. And by coming to church on a Sunday morning and sitting under a teaching for 40 minutes or whatever it is, not enough. You have to build a structure in your life. You have to have a daily practice, or this will not take root. Right? We've talked about this. Ramakrishna said that the mind is like a hot burner, and the teaching comes in like a drop of water. And if the mind that's identified as the body and the world is like a hot burner. The teaching is a drop of water. Just fizzles away. And you're you again. And you'll get up and you'll go out there and everything will be as it was before you came in. You have to interrupt that. You have to create a practice of some kind, sacred study of some kind. Right? This is what I offer. I'm not trying to say come to my classes, but do something more than just an hour a week. We have Monday night here. We have Tuesday Zen. We have coming up Wednesday Bible. That'll be down the pike. Thursday we have a Zoom class on A Course in Miracles. Cultivate this in your life. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. Hate to say that. But if it's just window shopping, it's not going to get you anywhere. Is that too hard? Take it back. Okay, so finishing up here. Because when you realize what the payoff is, if we could say that, where the end game is of your spiritual practice, you will be willing to give up everything. It will all seem like nothing in comparison to what you're going to discover. Let's just put this to final. So in short, this in short is the demand made on us that we should turn our whole life into a conscious self-giving. Every moment and every movement of our being is to be resolved into a continuous and a devoted self-giving to the eternal. Every moment, every breath, every pulsation is an offering at the altar of the divine within the heart. All our actions, not less the smallest and most ordinary and trifling than the greatest and most uncommon and noble, must be performed as consecrated acts. When you brush your teeth, when you wash the dishes, when you give your life's blood to help somebody who's in a tough state. These are all equally consecrated events that you're doing for the divine. Something that is beyond us and greater than our ego. Our individualized nature must live in the single consciousness of an inner and outer movement dedicated to something that is beyond us and greater than our ego. No matter what the gift and to whom it is presented by us, there must be a consciousness in the act that we are presenting it to the one divine being in all beings. Right? Not to the body, not to the personality, but to the Supreme. You're always looking at the Supreme in whatever act, whatever form of giving. That's what he's saying. That's how you consecrate your life and you return to this unity consciousness. Our commonest and most grossly material actions must assume this sublimated character. When we eat, we should be conscious that we are giving our food to that presence in us. It must be a sacred offering in a temple, and the sense of a mere physical need or self-gratification must pass away from us. In any great labor, in any high discipline, in any difficult or noble enterprise, whether undertaken for ourselves, for others, or for the human race, it will no longer be possible to stop short at the idea of the human race, of ourselves, or of others. The thing that we are doing must be consciously offered as a self-giving of all of our works, not to any of these, but either through them or directly to the one Godhead, the divine inhabitant who was hidden by these figures, must be no longer hidden, but ever present to our soul, our mind, our sense. So this gets us full circle. Paramatman. This is the indwelling presence of the divine, the spark at the heart of all beings. So when we are serving others, it's a devotion, a consecration to the spark that they are, the divinity within them. Right? So all of this is, as the Gita would say, all of this is Bhagavan. All of this is the display of the Supreme Person, and we are in the process, like infants, learning to redirect our attention, cultivate our effort, and discover this beatific vision within. Okay, my friends, blue bag's going to go around. If you have any thoughts or questions, let them rip. Mm-hmm. Yes. I love that. So, using the dove example for those who didn't hear, it's either a little baby or a self-assured adult that can stay in the middle of the road like that. And so as we begin to surrender into the divine presence, we go from being these infants to being these self-assured, solid, clear beings. To just cap that, there's a quote from A Course in Miracles, "Be humble before him, but great in him." So this is not a derogatory path where you're just this measly worm, this little servant, but you become the awakened self. Yeah? Let's bless the offering. Oh, I'm sorry, I kept you guys past time a few minutes. We charge this in offering with the intent that it be used to trigger the awakening within the heart of all beings, so that they may discover their true wisdom and true happiness. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, let's rise, seal the deal. And as you settle within for a moment, see if you can sense that song of the divine within the heart. It's being constantly played, this sacred vibration, this Om or Amen within the heart. And as we attune our inner senses to this divine vibration, we will know that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you guys so very much. Appreciate you. I'll see you soon. Have a great day.